Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're here with another of our virtual events. And it's always a treat and a thrill to have Jonathan Kellerman back with us, albeit virtually, in any form. And the brand new book, the new Alex Delaware, is called City of the Dead. And we have not received our copies quite yet, but we should have them very shortly. But I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field if should you wish to purchase one. I put a few copies of the book you did with Jesse from last fall called The Burning,
Yeah.
a couple of other books.
Good.
But I will be monitoring the comments and questions field on YouTube and on Facebook. I promise I won't hijack the conversation and talk about guitars and ouds for the entire hour, although I'd like to. But if you have questions for John, go ahead and put them in, and I'd be happy to ask them when Barbara summons me back. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. We're now holding up a book because John has kindly signed them and they are en route to us.
Yeah.
Excuse me, here in Scottsdale, but I read a manuscript of it. And one of the biggest frustrations of this conversation is going to be that we can't talk about the end, because I have to say, John, that this is one of your more brilliant sleight of hand, come on. I mean, I think I'm good, but I never saw this coming. What a job you did.
I think you nailed it, because this book is all about motive, and you don't find out about that motive until the end. It's a complex but believable psychological motive. And thanks for the kind comments. I'm really happy because this is the 37th book in the Delaware series. I think it's the longest running series, and reviews have said things like, one of his best, Kellerman at his best, he's not phoning it in. So it's always nice to be appreciated when you work hard at something and people.
Well, I know you work hard. I mean, I've been to visit you in your various homes, and I know you have a really great work ethic, and I know that you bring enormous professional expertise to writing about Alex Delaware. And I thought this book was one in which your own professional expertise really came in to play. I guess one of the things I find kind of interesting is Alex doesn't seem to spend a lot of time on his own practice. He's mostly hanging out with Milo in this book.
Well, what I have him doing, even in the first book, I had him not doing long-term therapy. He stayed away from it, did short-term consults. He mostly does legal work, custody work, and injury work. And I did a lot of that toward the latter years of my practice. So, I've been cross-examined several times. I've been on the witness stand. I was an expert witness. And it's a short-term, time-limited type of thing, which would lend itself to the rest of his life. And it's also extremely lucrative. So he'd be making quite a bit of money working not that much, which would free him up to get into trouble with Milo,
Well, I mean, it does give him an opportunity. I like the way they compare schedules, it's like, can you do this or that? But sometimes they're just like in the car and, Milo will say, well, we could do that. And Alex will say, go for it.
Yeah.
And they do spend a lot of time driving around Los Angeles. Therefore, they're spending a lot of time in the car and sometimes just kind of sitting in traffic, because that's how it is to drive.
That's LA. You have to give credence to your setting without making it boring. And that's LA, unfortunately. So.
Well, it is, but it gives them a chance to talk about things. So you have we can at least talk about the opener here. So you have a really dramatic opening scene.
Yeah.
Is this anything that you actually drew upon in real life, or did you just decide it would be an interesting thing to propel somebody into a truck?
I've always tried to approach things in an oblique manner. Dutch Leonard did it very well, and I've always enjoyed. You think the book's proceeding in a certain way, and that has nothing to do with the book, and it veers off. So I don't know. I just make this stuff up. It has nothing to do with reality at all. Barbara, my work well enough to know that it takes me as long to plan a book as it does to write a book.
Yeah.
And I speak to a lot of writers. They wonder, how do you write so many books? Blah blah blah. Well, it's all a matter of the planning. It's about a year process for me to write a book, and almost half of that is planning it. So I've put a lot of thoughts and outlining and time into the preparation. So by the time I sit down and write it, I'm feeling a heightened sense of confidence. Of course, I rewrite compulsively anyway, and I make mistakes, and I still paint myself into corners and paint myself out, because that's just part of the job. but having the confidence really, really helps.
Well, sure it does. And also, as you point out, this year's 37th dance with these guys.
Yeah.
So, so you know them. I don't think that you ever let their characters, become boring or cliched, but you're not world building with every book, because much of it
Exactly.
is already set up. I mean, Alex has Robin, and you get to have fun with her as a luthier, because that's what I think you actually secretly really want to be.
No, it's because Faye did that. Faye built a guitar in 1981. She has a degree in dentistry. She has a lot of good fine motor surgical skills. And she visited this luthier who worked on some of my guitars. He had a loft downtown. And she said, I wonder if I could do that. And she built one guitar. It's in my guitar book. And it is gorgeous. And people who know the other luthiers say, this sounds better than anything he ever built. She built one guitar. So that gave me the idea, because when I started the series, the first book came out in 85, but I started in 1981. It's a long time ago, almost 40 years ago. I wanted to work against stereotype. So any way I could. So I said, how about we have a couple where the male engages in human feelings and emotions, and the female engages with power tools. And I just thought it was an incredibly interesting stereotype shattering approach. And it still is, I think. So
I think it is too. And, and I like the fact that she is never ruffled by his time spent investigating, time spent with Milo and all, because she is always so absorbed.
She has her own life.
Own work.
She has her own life. The only conflict that's come up between them has been in the early days, when he wasn't sharing any of that world with her, out of fear of exposing her to the dark side, which of course she could see as patronizing. So they finally worked out an arrangement of how much he tells her, and I think it's worked out very, very well. But you talk about the fact that it's a long-running series, and people say it hasn't gotten stale, and I think it's for a specific reason. A lot of writers get tired of their series character. We know that Chandler just got tired of Marlowe, and he only wrote a half a dozen books with him. Even Lee Child, who's a marvelous writer, he's not writing Reachers anymore. He had enough. Delaware's a little different, even though he's a protagonist. And in some of the books, he's been the protagonist. I have always viewed him as a vehicle for telling a certain type of story. And to some extent, that parallels what a psychotherapist, what a psychologist or a psychiatrist does. If you had come into my office when I was in practice, there was nothing about me there except for diplomas, no pictures of my family, nothing. It was all about the person or the child that I was talking to. And that's what Delaware is. He's someone with insights. He's a smart guy. People bounce things against him. He observes, but it's not really about him. And that enables me to tell almost any story that I want that deals with human emotions. He's just a vehicle. So I think that's the reason that it has remained fresh, and fresh in my mind, because if I'm bored, then my reader's going to be bored.
Absolutely true. I forgot to raise a glass to Jonathan, because this is in fact his publication day.
It is.
I meant to do that. Last time we were together, we were drinking kosher wine. So here we are.
But excellent wine, right? Not Manischewitz. Brilliant stuff from Israel.
Indeed, it was. So, but you've got an interesting relationship, a balanced, a very well balanced and very functional relationship, very affectionate, loving relationship between Alex and Robin. But you've also got Milo, who is, who's gay, a gay cop, which in itself, again, is something of a challenge. And he has a really interesting partner. And his relationship, I think, is very interesting. Is that, I'm trying to remember, has the doctor always been in Milo's life throughout the series?
Rick Silverman has always been there. He's very different from Milo. You would look at Milo, because the stereotype of gay men, and it's a stereotype, is that they're always meticulous and neat and trim and take care of themselves. Well, that's the people you see and go, oh, he's gay. I have a lot of guys who write into me, or used to write in when I was taking email, and they were saying, I'm just like Milo. Thank you so much for writing about guys like, because there's all kinds of people. People are full of surprises. Rick is a surgeon. He's a little bit on the reserve side. He's not Mr. Warmth. He's a very meticulous guy. And then you got Milo, who's, I won't say slovenly, but he is not appearance conscious at all. And there are guys like that. I kind of thought of Charles Lawton when I was developing him, because he was gay, you know, but he was certainly not what you'd see as the stereotype. Everything about the origins of that series with When the Brahmins was about fighting stereotype. I didn't know I was going to get published, let alone write a series, let alone write a 35-year plus series. So you stick it all into the first book, and then you have to keep doing it. So you develop the characters. But to me, it's like David Mamet said, it's all about the story. Yes, characterization is what people will remember, but that comes through the story. Anything that breaks up the story, I'm not interested in. I like that story to drive forward, to impel the reader to keep going. So
well,
that's
I wasn't sure how you were going to top Serpentine, your book last year, because I thought that was an extraordinary book. But here you are. And so when we open it and we have these two guys driving the moving van, you know, I keep thinking it's going to be about them. And then suddenly there's something that happens and it's not about them. They're almost like your first red herring.
Yeah, and it's not even a red herring. It's just like, this is what happens when people get involved, when they discover a body. They're basically like the hunters who discover a body, but we don't know that. We think they're involved, and they're interesting guys. You know, I don't believe in minor characters either. I don't believe anyone appears in my books. They have, even if they were there for a paragraph or a page, they have to be interesting. I don't believe in throwaways at all. So
well, no, they very much come alive, and you're there with them in the truck. And you know what I envisioned happening was somebody, you know, it was going to be a heist, and there was going to be something in the truck, and it was, you know, these poor guys, one of them will get killed, and you know, it'll all be awful. And then all of a sudden, there's this weird noise, and there they are. What I mean, that is such an interesting way to introduce a body and discover a body. What inspired you to turn this poor man into a projectile?
I don't know how I come up with this stuff. You know, as I say, it takes a long time to plan a book. And, you know, I have these, whenever something occurs to me, I write it down now, because I have reached a certain age and have my short-term memory has diminished considerably. So I write things down, right? As all of us. In fact, I remember, you know, Sherry Lewis, the puppeteer.
Right.
So she was a friend of ours, and we'd have dinner with Sherry, and she and her husband, Jeremy Tarcher, and she was writing everything down. She was speaking, and she was probably in her late 60s. She didn't live very long, unfortunately. So I said, I wonder if I'll ever have to do that. Well, I do, and so I have to, because I'll be 73 this summer, and I have to. I have
Poor
to.
Baby.
I know, but it's fine. My mother's 102. She just.
I know. Jonathan tells me that his mother's the oldest person that he knows, but I am almost surely the second oldest person.
No, Barbara, not even close. But anyway, so you know, I just try to write things down. So I have these voluminous files, and with plot lines and ideas. Whenever something occurs to me, I just write it down.
Yeah.
But I don't know how this stuff happens. I just think those of us who are successful novelists of any sort we just have a brain that works in a certain way. I mean, I'm just very curious, fascinated. I love people. I'm fascinated with them. Love to meet new people. Never had any sort of social anxiety. I've never experienced it ever in my life, not once. I have a nephew, and I know he's a gregarious guy. And I said, "What's it like for you when you meet a new person?" He goes, "I'm so excited." I said, "That's how I feel, you know." So fictional people too, I get to create them and play God, and I get to meet them and develop things. So it's just great fun. I mean, Graham Greene said, when a writer turns 60, the only reasons to write are fun and money, hopefully both. So, you know, that's what I'm doing, just concentrating on process, forgetting about the business, forgetting about all the bullshit, and just focusing on writing a good book. And there's a certain purity of that is very enjoyable.
You and I have talked about that, you know, that there's no reason for me to send you reviews or, you know, congratulate you or where you on the bestseller list or anything, because you don't actually even pay attention to it anymore.
Do you know when I stopped paying attention to reviews? My second novel. So the first novel, of course, you know, you're so jazzed. People are saying wonderful things about you. And then I got this big packet of reviews on Blood Test, which is a tough book. And one of them says, this is so sensitive. He deals with these topics so wonderfully. It's so, and then the next one says, this is so insensitive. And this guy should be ashamed of himself. So I was trained as a scientist, and I said to myself, well, none of this is valid, right? It's just people's opinions. So I'm not going to pay attention to it ever. And since 1986, I have not paid attention to any of that stuff because it's distracting. Now, if I got reviews that consistently said the same thing over and over and over, but it's never that way. Fortunately, I've been kindly treated for the most part. My reviews are almost all good or mostly good. But when someone doesn't like it, it's just their opinion. And as long as a few people have a good opinion, they let me keep doing it, I'm a happy camper.
Well, if you were hearing a bell toll in every review that
Exactly.
was saying Kellerman's passed it, then
Yeah.
I think you would pay attention. But I was really, shared when we had dinner last June or whenever it was, that you had signed up for additional books, so you are, I'm glad to say right at the outset here that Jonathan is going to keep writing. This is not like the prelude to that I'm done announcement.
No. Well, I mean, I'll tell you what COVID has done. I've spoken to a lot of people in publishing, and they're telling me so many writers have just frozen. It's been really difficult. People can't write. They're getting depressed. For me, I've written 3 novels. I finished this one. I finished the one coming out in a year. I finished the one coming out in 2 years. And I have 50 pages of the one coming out in 3 years because, I don't travel as much. So I sit down and write. I do my job. And I'm not writing quickly. I'm trying to slow things down. Doesn't seem to change the product to some extent. Now, my son, we have to delay the Clay Edison book because he and his wife just had identical twins. They were trying for a 4th. They got a 4th and a 5th. So Jesse and Gabri have 5 lovely children. He have 2 identical twin boys, Henry Wolf Kellerman and Abram Franz Kellerman. They already sound like German professors, and they're really cute. But Jesse is busy, needless to say. So we've done about a third of that book, and it'll come out when it comes out. But
it'll come out when it comes out.
Yeah,
sure.
The delivers are done. I mean, they're basically finished and accepted and paid for, and just move on and do another one. So I have a few more. And as long as, look, publishing is not what it used to be on so many levels, but I'm still having fun, still enjoying it. And as long as I'm having fun and people are enjoying the books, I don't want to be a pathetic has-been, but I'd like to think I'm still a young guy. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I will tell you if I think you're past it. I actually had that conversation when Patrick and his colleague Bill, I've started giving the bookstore to them. So we did a formal, business appraisal and handed over 10% each. And I said to Bill, and he was just sort of white-faced when I said this, but I said, Bill, part of the deal is that you're going to have to tell me if I'm past it, because it's really unlikely I'm going to retire voluntarily. But one of the troubles with, with aging, if dementia or something creeps over you, is you don't necessarily recognize it. So
I somehow think you're going to be also doing this for a long time.
Well, we'll see. Nobody can predict it. But
know.
I mean, I think it's important that you have somebody you can trust who says to you, maybe it's time to stop. It really, because it's hard to judge that for yourself. And I mean, one of your standards might be, I'm just not having fun anymore. And that might be enough.
Yeah. And people have different approaches and shelf lives. There are people who want to write one book. I will write as many as people want to read, and I think I've written close to 60 books at this point. And I can't believe it myself. I never thought that was going to happen, but I don't even think about writing a book. That's another thing that I tell young aspiring writers. Don't even think about writing a book. It's too frightening. I just think about writing a few good pages a day, break it down. And then if you keep doing that, you have a book at some point. But the idea of writing a book is
it's a little scary, but you just want to tell a story. And, it's another way to look at it. You're not writing a book, you're telling a story. So let's talk a little bit about Cordelia, because I thought, it seems logical that there would be a fairly small community that Alex would be familiar with, of people who are in his field and who are similar field and are called to testify in, custody cases or other sorts of disputes. So you've got this woman, and he is able to recognize she's the second dead person that we encounter. And I found that really interesting. Did you run across, in real life, did you run across somebody who basically fakes it, or or sets themselves up to practice without the real qualifications?
Well, not in custody, although I did come up against a lot of inept witnesses and inept attorneys. I could tell you stories from today till tomorrow about the things that I saw within the court system. This I wanted to write about because I think there's an irony going on. Those of us who are licensed, although I'm no longer licensed, I let my license go inactive, but psychiatrists, physicians, psychologists, social workers, nurses, we have licenses. And with the license comes an ethical code. And the state, the government, which is usually the state and sometimes the federal government, imposes great restrictions on us, continuing education. So it's, to be a professional, you're dealing with a lot of regulation. Sometimes too much, but certainly you need some of it. The irony is that now, due to the internet, anyone can call themselves a life coach. Anyone can call themselves a relationship expert. Anyone can label this, as long as they don't use those things, psychologist, physician, and they have no restrictions at all. So it's kind of ironic that we're punishing the good kids and rewarding the bad kids. So, frauds can do whatever they want as long as they don't pretend to be a licensed professional. Even then, they can often get away with it. So I never encountered anybody in that situation, but I have been aware of, the internet's like fire. You can cook with it or burn with it. I mean, there's a girl who danced on TikTok and made $17.5 million last year. It's just a crazy world. Maybe I'm just too old and I don't get it, but the internet, you can do, it just blows everything up. It's just an exaggerating, everything good or bad is blown up. So wonderful things have come on it, but then you have people just going online and people say, well, it's on the internet, it must be true. So you have a lot of quackery now. You always had quackery. Now you have a different type of quackery that it's not technically illegal. There are no restrictions as long as you don't pretend to be a psychologist.
Right. No, I can see that. You could set yourself up as a relationship coach or whatever. And, like you could, pretend to be a guru. I mean, it's not really that new. There are always people that, set themselves up as healers or some kind of spiritual figure or something. And they weren't licensed for it, didn't have any particular qualifications. But it's interesting because, when she's found dead, it leads into all kinds of different directions about why she might be dead.
Yeah, we just don't know. And the thing about, and I'm sure you've heard this from other writers as well, you come up with certain things you don't like about a certain character, but in almost every instance, it's not so much to like, I get to know that person and I develop a sort of empathy and appreciation for that person. So I'm always finding as much humanity as I possibly can in just about every character, including some bad guys. Even there, you try to understand them, it doesn't excuse them. The problem with certain points of view is they think that you can understand somebody, you'll excuse them. No, you don't excuse them, but you do understand them. So I found myself getting extremely sympathetic with Cordy and everyone else, and because you realize everyone has difficulties and challenges, and how we deal with those determines how our lives go, and sometimes they don't go well. And that's what crime novels are all about. We're writing about the darker aspects of humanity. I mean, to me, a crime novel is a novel like any other, but a crime catalyzes the development. It's just that's the catalyst. Could be it could be something else in a different type of novel. I mean, was The Count of Monte Cristo a crime novel? Genres are not that important. These are about people and they're doing interesting things.
They are doing interesting things. So one of the first problems then that Milo has is he's got this dead young man and nobody has any idea who he is.
Yeah.
And now we have, Cordy who's dead and there's some question about who she is. So it seems to me it's interesting to wind up with two victims at the outset and you don't know for sure who they are.
Well, every detective will tell you that the first thing they want to do is identify the victim. You cannot solve a crime unless you've identified the victim. But I'm dealing with two levels of identification of victim. We're dealing with the literal identification, the name, the statistics, and then we're dealing with the psychological identification of that victim, understanding who that victim is. Not just, I don't think most homicide cops get into that level. They want to identify the victim, so they know who did the victim talk to, who did they hang out with, who were their friends, because they're always working outward. They have kind of a playbook, and the playbook always says you start with the people the victim knows, and if that doesn't work, you work your way out. It works on a statistical level because most people are murdered by people that they know and know well. But of course, being a novelist, I always like to write about the exceptions rather than the rule. In fact, someone asked me years ago, what's the difference when you were a psychologist from being a novelist? And I said, well, as a psychologist, you try to develop rules of human behavior. And as a novelist, you try to deal with the exceptions to the rules.
Well, the other thing too, which I think is also true, is that the cops have a duty, to inform the next of kin, so to speak.
Yeah.
And, you can't do that. And that's a precursor, of course, to finding out who the circle of intimates is and sort of working the case. But, it's never a good idea for the relatives of a murder victim to discover this has happened from the newspaper or, somebody posted on the internet or something. So that's an additional problem for them, is their duty to inform.
And I don't think you'll ever meet a single homicide cop who doesn't say, that is the part of my job that I hate the most.
Right.
I hate that. I mean, it's a terrible thing to have to do. It's interesting when we dealt with it, when Jess and I developed the Clay Edison series, I think we talked about this, but I had conceived of writing a series about a coroner's investigator because no one had ever written about that. And it's a fascinating thing, but I was looking at the LA model. In the LA model, the CI is a civilian. Generally, it could be a retired cop, it could be a nurse, a social worker, and they work for the coroner. But then we decided to set the series up in Northern California, where Jesse lives in Alameda County. They have a totally different system, as you've seen from the Clay Edison books. The coroner's investigator, in fact, the coroner is the sheriff, and the coroner's investigator are sheriff's deputies. They're uniformed guys, and they are the people who do the death knock, the CIs. Right. So that's different. Here, and in most cases, it's the homicide detective. But up in Northern California, in Clay Edison territory, it's guys like Clay Edison who have to do that. It's
Is that a county by county thing, John?
I believe it is. I think
it must be, because California officials wouldn't have a different rule for Northern California.
No, it's county, and that's Alameda County, which incorporates Berkeley and the whole Bay Area, Oakland. In fact, that was a tough nut to crack. I've never had problems getting to any police department. It was really hard to gain access to the Alameda sheriffs because they were having so many problems with the community. And they were really gun shy. But we finally convinced them that we were going to write exposés. And Jesse has since become friends with a lot of the sheriffs. So he has instant access to them. So it's very good. But anyway, doing that death notification, it's a really terrible thing. Think about having to do that. And it is part of the job, somebody's job. And in LA, it's part of the detective's job.
Yeah.
So
I think that was, you can argue on the one hand, it gives them a chance to sort of check out whether grief is genuine and, what kind of reaction they get from the victim's nearest and dearest. Because as you point out, crimes are most often committed by people close to the victim, and then it kind of branches out.
You want to understand,
talk about this whole book. This is so annoying. We ought to really have like a book club discussion of this book when it's seriously, because it's just so surprising. Is how this works.
That's what it's all about. And you try to do it in a believable way. I'm pretty picky about that kind of thing.
Right. So the original guy, the first victim, the young man, doesn't really lead them anywhere. But when they start looking into the death of Cordelia, then there's a whole kind of breadcrumbs thing that we follow, because she has had a complicated life.
I never see myself writing these books in terms of red herrings. And I never have intentionally done a red herring. What I try to do is think of these characters until they're real in my head, and then get to know them through the process of detection. And sometimes it leads me in a way that I didn't initially plan. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it goes just the way I have planned it. But I'm almost always changing things as I learn more about that person. So I guess even though my books are plot heavy, I just don't see myself as laying breadcrumbs or trying to fool the reader. I just try to write us. I do like surprises, and I think any fiction has to be about surprise. You have to want to turn the page. In a crime novel, it's a crime, but any novel, if it's worth its salt, you're going to want to keep reading it because you want to be surprised. and it's nice to be surprised in a controlled manner.
Absolutely true. So Butcher's Theater, going back, Lord, I don't even know how long. Now that you're living in Israel part-time, are you in any way inspired to write a novel, any kind of a novel set in Israel?
No, I gave that book my best. That book took so much out of me.
Yeah.
It was a long book. First of all, the manuscript was over 1,000 pages. It was a 600-page book. Maybe I'd write it a little smaller today, but I remember Elmer Leonard saying, "How did you write such a great big book?" Because he was right, I said, I didn't intend to, trust me. But I just decided that was going to be my one shot dealing with that. And I'm just going to concentrate on Delaware's because, as I say, he's a vehicle for a certain type of story and the kind of story that I like to tell. It's interesting. I was trying to, I struggled to get published. I was a failed writer, so I figured out, write what you know. And by that time, I had accrued sufficient life experience as a psychologist. And I realized what I was doing was detective work. I was doing detective work. Right. Think about it from my perspective, whether it be at the hospital, but anytime a new patient would come in, a child generally, because I was dealing with kids or teenagers, presenting a problem, it's not like in medicine where the same symptom, if you have a rash, it's a few things, but you can have the same symptom, it can be due to 100 different things or combinations. So the key was trying to put together what was going on with this person in a pretty rapid manner, because you want to treat it as quickly as possible. And I realized I was doing that. So I thought that a psychologist lent itself very, very well to the crime novel. Did I ever tell you about the cop who called me, who emailed me about what happened, so this is a few years ago. I get this email from a cop, I think it was in upstate New York. He said, I have this case. I got this guy, and I know that he murdered his girlfriend's 3-year-old kid, but I can't prove it. He won't admit it. I don't know what to do. If you have any ideas. So I said, well, look, you're a cop. I'm just a writer seeing 3,000 miles away. But if I were you, if there's any approach, I said, don't yell at this guy. The more you threaten him, the worse it's going to be. It's like Chinese finger puzzle. The tighter it gets, the harder it gets. I said, the only thing I can think of is try to get him to dissociate from it and try to get him to talk about it in a dissociative way. And I said, try to get him to talk about it in a theoretical way, as if someone else did it, so he can distance himself. He goes, oh, okay, yeah, sounds like Columbo flick, And then 3 days later, I get this email saying, I did what you said and it worked. Thank you very, very much. And I went online and sure enough, it shows a picture of this detective arresting this guy for murder. So I helped solve a crime long distance. I was very proud of myself.
I love that. Detective author.
Isn't that great? Isn't that great?
It really is. Yeah. To crime solving. So working with Jesse, does he has a different, Jesse wrote several absolutely terrific standalone novels set in very different worlds. I loved his art world one. Then he wrote one about a writer.
The genius. It was brilliant stuff.
Yeah, no, terrific. So is Jesse's, you obviously haven't killed each other yet. So I'm assuming that you're managing, but is Jesse's approach to writing the novel different than yours? It must be.
In some ways it's similar, in some ways it's different. And it's been very interesting. Not only have we killed each other, but honestly, we have not exchanged one hostile syllable. It has been a love fest all the way through. Jesse and I were very close. Of course, then he went through adolescence, and Faye would say, "Oh, the two of you, these alpha males, it's so loud when you guys are yelling at each other." But basically, we've always gotten along extremely well. He was my only son. He was my first child. I spent a lot of time with him. I just love him to death, and I think he's the smartest person I've ever met. So he's a very impressive guy. Not only is he really smart, but he can deadlift 600 pounds. So he's a physical monster too. So I love him. He's great. So working together with him has been a very harmonious thing. I had written with a partner in college for 4 years as a cartoonist, working together, doing columns, and then Faye and I wrote a few novellas, and that worked out fine. I think I'm pretty easy to work with. I had a staff of 12 people at Children's Hospital, and 3 psychologists, and they're all my friends. 40 years later, all 3 are very good friends. So I think I'm pretty good working with people. I don't like to control anybody. I like people to do their job. I'm pretty meticulous, but I thought I was a perfectionist till I started working with Jess. Oh my God, it's a different level of perfectionism. I'm willing to do an outline and everything, but then at some point I will wing it, I will just, and he wants to know everything. He has copious notes. He has flow charts. I mean, he's so meticulous. And I think it's great. In that way, we have a different style, but both of us outline. And the interesting thing is when we get together, and we do a lot of talking about the books because there's 2 of us, when we get together, it's this wonderful thing happens, which I've experienced with other writing partners, mostly writing comedy. Comedy seems to really blossom in a collaborative setting. Jesse's background was in theater. He was a director, he was a playwright, he was an actor. When we get together and we discuss the plot, it's just so much fun, and it's the greater than the sum of the parts. Definitely, it's stuff neither of us would have thought of. It comes from that cross-pollination. When we did the first Golem book, I don't know if I told you, but I sent it to Stephen King, who was very, very supportive. And he said, this took my breath away. He says, I know Jesse's voice. I know your voice. You guys have created a new voice. And that's what it is. It's neither him, it's neither me, nor me, but it's been wonderful. I don't know, he has another project that he's doing on his own, but it's one of those long-term things that he's really enjoying the luxury of taking his time with as we do the Edison, and there's several more that we're under contract for. Now, of course, he and his wife are home with 5 children, including 2 newborns. So it's pretty.
It'll be a while.
Yeah,
I understand that.
They're not overwhelmed. I got to say, they're doing a great job. They actually had the wherewithal. We flew up to their daughter's birthday party. They have 1 daughter and 4 sons. The poor girl, she's right in the middle, and she's the CMO of the family, chief managing officer. She's 6 and very, very smart. And so they managed to throw a lovely birthday party outdoors for all her friends with these 2 newborns. And my daughter-in-law also has a book coming out with Atria. It's a business book, a nonfiction book. She's an MD, but she's a big executive in a big healthcare corporation. So, they're really exceptional people, both of them. And her name is Gabriella. Her nickname is Gavri. Gavri carried around 12 pounds of baby. That's pretty good.
It is pretty good.
Yeah, and helping to run this company, this $1.5 billion company. So they're pretty impressive, I gotta say. I think I tell them.
Well, you would think if you didn't know our story that Jonathan and I would have been friends, and then I would have gotten to know Jesse. But in truth, it was really Jesse that I knew, and Jonathan and Faye came. We all came together really over support of Jesse. So one thing I knew about you from the very beginning was what absolutely fabulous parents you are, because Jesse never can say anything but, laudatory things about you. He was obviously, so happy in his family life. And
he was. Except with adolescents, I have wonderful kids. Adolescents, I was ready to ship them all out on our Arctic ice floe. No question.
Well,
no, we have Jesse. We have Jesse and 3 daughters. Rachel and Ilana, the two middle daughters, are both PhDs in psychology, very prominent psychologists. And Lizzie, Elisa, is a published writer working on a novel, and she's almost 30, and she's the youngest. She has a newborn. So we have 11 grandkids now, and which I call great passive investment. You don't have to do any work.
Investment.
You go home, basically.
Rob and I decided to become new parents in August. And, it's really an interesting thing because we lost our older dog and we got lonely with just the one. Yeah. So we met a Cavapoo, believe it or not, on the bus from the rental car place to the Denver airport. We fell in love with this little dog sitting across from us. He was so cute. And his mom said he was a Cavapoo. So when we got home, I said to Rob, we should really look at Cavapoos because they're so adorable. So Rob found an ad from a woman who lives here, and this adorable little boy with this little white face and the whole thing. And so he called her and she said she would bring him up, and she said, we don't let our puppies go unless we come up and examine the home. We want to make sure it's all going to be good. Well, that was her ostensible reason, but what she actually did was she showed up with two of them. She showed up with a little boy, and then she showed up with this little girl who was the last of the litter. And, what do you do when you see the two of them and you think, you can't separate what will happen to the little girl? Exactly. She's left all alone, whatever. So we became parents of two. But the interesting part was when she left, she said to us very seriously, she said, I had to recently, she said, there was a couple in Sun City that wanted to adopt one of the puppies. And she said, I had to turn them down because they're too old. And I worried about the dog. And so I let that go. But
good for you. You see, I told
for the dogs and she was leaving, I said to her, how old do you think I am?
Yeah.
And she, kind of looked at me, and I told her. And I said, but don't worry, I said, because we already have a plan in place. The dogs have a place to go and a trust fund to look after them. So, it really doesn't matter how old we are.
I'll tell you, the animals, you've met our little Colette, and animals have always been really important to us. If people don't like animals, I don't want to deal with them. But
I just enjoyed the way she knew. I think she absolutely knew we would never be able to break up this little. I was thinking about your identical twins.
Good for you. So
there they are, but they're so cute. And now it's time to call Patrick up because you do, in fact, have to sign off here. And
I have to sign off at, let's see, in 15
7
minutes.
You said. So we have about 13 or 14 minutes. And Patrick, you cannot geek out on guitars.
Let's do the questions.
Yep. All right. Let's see here. I'm not sure if we have too many questions. Just a number of people. Let's see. A lot of just really nice comments. Jennifer says, you're one of my favorite authors. I truly enjoy every one of your books. You are the one author that I don't even have to look at the storyline before buying. Thank you for your books.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. It means a lot.
Yeah. Linda says, I used to love Milo and his Johnson's baby powder. Did he join the class action suit against Johnson & Johnson?
I don't remember Johnson's baby powder, but if you say so. Milo doesn't sue people. He's too busy catching bad guys.
Wanda says, my favorite modern day American author. Your books never disappoint.
Thank you.
Hi from Australia. People are tuning in from, and then to counterbalance that, hello from Redondo Beach.
There you go.
Bud Johnson. Any other questions? Okay, here we go. With the changes through the last couple of years, do you find that you need inspiration at times? What do you do to keep your motivation or inspiration? You kind of talked about that a little bit, but.
I mean, it's been a rough few years. This is the first time in a century that we've had the last pandemic was 1918. I gotta be honest, it's been tough for everybody, but it's been a lot easier for Faye and myself because even prior to this, we work at home. So we haven't had to change much. We've been restricted travel-wise. I didn't get to see my kids and grandkids as much as possible, but when we did get vaccinated 3 times, vaccine kicked my ass twice. Very tough, but I'm glad I did it. And it's been actually a creative time for me in the sense I've just been doing my thing. So, and by the way, someone else once asked, is the pandemic ever going to find its way into your novels? The answer is a resounding no, because my job is to entertain you and take you away from reality. I do not want to bring in that type of, no politics, no pandemic, none of that stuff, just good, interesting stories about people we care about. So no, I haven't. Inspiration, it's not like it's one thing, you know. A novel comes from it takes time to germinate. It doesn't come from one idea. It may be kicked off by something I've seen or heard or read or written down, but then taking an idea and turning it into a novel, that's like taking a note and turning it into a symphony. You know the key you want to write in, but that may change too.
Right. The field of psychiatry has changed so profoundly in a lot of ways. Do you keep up with some of that stuff, or do you have?
Well, I do. I mean, psychology, psychiatry, it really hasn't changed as much as other aspects of medicine. Really, other aspects of medicine are way changing. The guy who was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine a few years ago, before he took over, he went back and read 10 years worth of the most prestigious medical journal in the world. And he said, almost everything in there was wrong. So it evolves. That's why when I see a lawn sign and someone says, we believe in science, that tells me you don't know what science is. Science is not a religion. Science is an evolving thing. Psychology has changed to some extent, but not that much. I talk to my daughters, and I do keep abreast of it, but I talk to my daughters, both of whom are relatively new PhDs. And it's just a matter of getting skills. You know, like there are surgeries that are still going on that have been done since the 30s. The key is to be good, find a good person. It really matters. It's not enough to go into therapy or go into counseling or get an operation. You really have to find the right person.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do try to keep abreast of it. I'm certainly interested. And a lot of my friends are psychologists. So I do talk to them quite a bit about it.
I have a question, John. You know, with telemedicine and teleconsultations and all,
Yeah.
do you think that I know you're not actually doing it, but do you think that is a reasonable thing, you know, during the pandemic when you can't?
Yes.
Yes. Do you have to physically be with the person, or can you pick up all the cues that you need from this kind of a conversation?
I think ideally it's best to be in the room. So you feel that warmth, that human experience. Although some types of personalities prefer the distance. You know, a lot of people prefer that. One of my daughters has a very successful practice here in Beverly Hills. And in the beginning, she was mostly doing telemedicine. Now she's doing a combination of both. Although she goes to her office to do the telemedicine, she keeps it professional. And I talked to her about it, and she said, you know, you can do it. You can do it. It's very effective. And sometimes can be more effective because it's easier for people. They don't have to travel, and you can appointments. So how long that will, I think it'll be an enduring part of healthcare to some extent, but I would prefer, if I was seeing a therapist, to be in a room with that person. I just think there's something about humanity, but I think it's a good thing. I mean, given the fact that without it, what do you have, you know?
There's a real analogy between the bookstore or book events, you know, virtual events and in-store events.
Exactly.
They sometimes take on a different energy. You know, sometimes the Zoom conversations can have more of an intimacy than the in-person ones.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, you try to concentrate on the other person, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, part of it, John, is that when you're hosting a live event, you have to be alive to an awful lot of things regarding the audience. You know, you have to, I mean, you know, you have to worry about their comfort. You have to worry about safety. You have to think, well, you know, depending on the size of the crowd, how long is it going to take people to want to stand in line and get their book signed? Everybody has a camera, you know, now on a phone, so it takes twice as long as it ever used to.
Yeah.
And so you can be distracted by all that. But when we're talking on Zoom, you know, none of this is coming into play. And then we can really focus on, you know, and so Patrick and I have found that we've gotten closer to some authors without all that extraneous stuff.
It makes sense. It's much more, it's very efficient. because you can concentrate on just doing it and not be
But as you
distracted.
point out, you do miss the people in the room, and you miss
The energy.
yeah, you really miss the energy. And so, you know, we videoed all of our events that were live anyway.
Yeah.
And I will continue to do that. Patrick actually now has set up a real kind of little studio. So we're a little more professional with better microphones and, you know, and the whole bit. But what we have found, the downside of it is that in the live events we've done, we've had a fairly small audience, and we think that people are really very happy to be home watching it and ordering their books. So I don't know if we have, in a way, kind of, you know, decimated the ranks.
I think we'll have to wait. I think we'll have to wait a while before the dust settles when this thing is finally over. In the sense, I mean, it may always be around, but when the pandemic's over, people have normal lives. It'll take more than a year. You know, some people are going to continue to wear a mask while they're driving their car by themselves, no matter what, because their anxiety level is so high. But we'll see. It's just interesting to me. It's just an interesting phenomenon to see how people have reacted.
Well, it is interesting, and since it's actually accelerated business, you know, we can afford to take a more clinical look at how it will all develop than, you know, if we'd cratered as a consequence of it. So that part's really good. Patrick, is there anything you want to ask John other than about his guitars?
Man.
Any other questions out there?
Let's see.
Just happy to answer. I got about 5-6 more minutes.
Yeah, this is this is a good insight. Linda says, with Zoom, everyone is in the front row. You can make comments you might not be able to do in public. And then she says, I do, however, value in-person visits. Yeah, there are pluses and minuses to both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we are, because we are the most efficient and intelligent animal, we are adapting. We are evolving. And that's what it is to be human. So
very true. But we've been fortunate too that technology has provided us with a couple of unexpected tools like Zoom that came along just at the magical moment and are not too hard to use or too expensive for most people to use.
True.
And I think we've actually educated a lot of our, not educated, but a lot of our customers who perhaps didn't spend any particular time online or weren't particularly sophisticated using their laptops or phones or computers have had to become so. And so that, you know, that's made them more willing to engage this way than before. So, you know,
I'm sure we will be continuing to do it and hopefully go back to live and have a combination.
Absolutely. So since Faye is not in the room, are we looking for a book from Faye anytime soon?
I think Faye has a book in the summer coming out called The Hunt, and it's her masterpiece. And you notice I say I think, because even though Faye and I have been married nearly 50 years and we're best friends, we love each other, we have really kept our careers separate. I don't really pay attention to what's going on in her career. She doesn't pay attention to what's going on. I mean, we care about each other, but we don't, you know, we really, it's our privacy. Our careers are the only privacy we have.
Well, and there's no rivalry as a consequence of that, which is
you know, people would always try to do that in the early days when we're sitting around doing a signing in a mall, Walden Books, and people walk over and go, well, I can only afford to buy one. Which one should I buy? Or who's better? You know, these kind of annoying. And Faye developed her stock answer. It all goes into the same bank account.
Well, I will be in touch with Faye because it'll be a pleasure to talk to her.
In the summer, I think it's in the summer, I'm pretty sure.
Right. All right. Well, we will check. Well, Jonathan, as always, it's been a real pleasure. Let me salute you again on Publication Day. City of the Dead, the 37th, Alex, Delaware. We are not holding up our autographed copy, but we know for sure they'll probably be in tomorrow, actually.
Let me know. Okay.
Don't fail to order one because I'm telling you, it is a really terrific and surprising book.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the fans I can't see. I wouldn't be able to do this without you, and I love you and I appreciate you.
Thank you, John. Good night.
Thanks so much, John.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.